Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and exciting episode of the English blog. My name is Adrian.
I'm Christine.
I'm PJ.
And I'm Sarah.
We're a blog of English teachers by English teachers and for English teachers.
And today we are hosting Season 2, Episode 5 of the English vlog. We are talking about teaching writing to ESL students.
That's right. And don't forget, our team at the English blog also provides customized lesson plans, services, and curriculum, life and career coaching sessions. And we also produce weekly vlog and blog content related to ESL education. Please do check out our articles at www.theenglishblog.com and subscribe to our website for exciting offers and updates.
And you can also follow us on all kinds of social media. You can find us and all our videos, plus links to our articles on Facebook English Blog for Teachers. Our Instagram handle is the English blog. And our LinkedIn is also there as a company as the English blog. So you can check out all our articles and videos across all these platforms.
Awesome. So let's get right to it. The first question is, what are ways to motivate students who struggle or do not enjoy writing? I think I'm like this when I was a student. So in the advent of and the rise of social media, why not? My number one tip is make it about them. Make them write about how their day went, or what are their hobbies and interests, and engage them in stories that require their personal details. I'm not saying confidential details, but the things that are really interesting for the guys. And another way that you can also motivate your students is make them realize that all the movies that we've watched, all of the books that we've read are all because of writers who started the really difficult process, sometimes, most of the time, solitary process of writing. And that way they will have a better appreciation of the finished work of writing.
I would like to add a tip that I have used, but it is a little bit specific. The teacher needs a certain set of skills. You basically also need to have learned another language or be in the process of learning it. When I work with kids, I find that they're often really anxious about writing and they feel really insecure, especially because generally their speaking is at a higher level than their writing if they're learning as a child, and they get frustrated that they cannot express the nuance of their thoughts written at the same ability that they can spoken. So when I run into kids like that have this kind of fear issue, I find it really helps. If I ask them to do a free write and I want you to write for 3 minutes, I write in their language that I'm learning as a second language. I'll write a thing in Spanish and let them look at it and see that this happens to everybody, children and adults. And here I am, and everybody knows I speak English just fine. It's great. And here is a piece of writing I produced in Spanish that is, I don't know, a fourth of what I wanted to say. And it's okay. It's a process, and everybody is going through it, and they're not unique. They're right on track.
And one thing I would like to add is, I work with students who get very discouraged by writing because they're perfectionists. They want to write with perfect grammar, the exact right vocabulary, and when they make one minor mistake in writing, they get very discouraged. And I would suggest, similar to what Sarah suggested, is giving them free writing activities, which is an activity that allows them to write without editing or stopping. And when you are doing that, you're giving them a lot of freedom. They are a lot less inhibited in their writing. And I think that is very empowering for them, and it gives them a lot of confidence. And then the the grammatical corrections can come a little bit later, but maybe give them some free writing activities until they have built enough confidence to do more challenging writing activities.
I would say make sure that you give them some of the vocabulary that they need to complete the task. So we talked about scaffolds in a previous episode, and a great scaffold for writing would be doing something like a guided writing. So when it's a guided writing, let's say you've been doing a unit on transportation. So uh, get support from the whole group and brainstorm the vocabulary that you learned for transportation, okay, or travel. Put all of those words on the board, and that gives them a word bank to begin writing. So usually what happens is when they're afraid of writing, their mind goes blank. And even if they've learned all the words, they suddenly don't remember anything. And so this is a great opportunity to leverage communal learning. So everybody only has to give one word to contribute to the brainstorm for the vocabulary, but then the whole class gets to use like 20, 25 words as a result. So make writing a more collaborative endeavor if you can.
Nice start. And here's the next question. Can students be good writers without thorough knowledge of English grammar and mechanics?
So I have a lot of feelings on this topic, and my feelings are definitely yes. I think all too often for teachers and students alike, the real purpose of writing gets lost, which is to communicate. So just like speaking, you can communicate without every single thing being perfect. You can do that in writing too, and that can make the writing a success. You need the grammar and the mechanics to get your meaning across. If they're incorrect and it starts to cloud your meaning, that's a problem. I also think that getting too nitpicky all the time with everything when you are teaching writing is very discouraging. I think it glosses over the world of English and world Englishes. Grammar isn't consistent between different types of English anyway, and it's a little bit more flexible. So it's not the end all be all. I think teachers and students need to remember that this is what's important in writing is the idea that you're communicating, and it's very discouraging to get feedback only on mechanics and grammar when you thought you were writing to share an idea and all of a sudden the idea is irrelevant. So always keep that idea relevant, and I would argue way more relevant than the punctuation and grammar that helps you communicate it.
I would say that students need a little bit of meta language to become a good writer. So maybe not a thorough knowledge of English grammar is necessary, but I do think that they need to know a few different parts of speech and how they're used. So I think it's very hard for them if they can't recognize what a verb does, what a subject does, what an adjective does. But anything beyond that is an additional skill that will help their writing. So can they be good writers without a thorough knowledge of English grammar? Their ideas can be good, but that you know, even for writers in their mother tongue, you know, we work on things like punctuation, we work on things in connotation and denotation. So I think, you know, a better question is, are you having realistic expectations of your students' writing output at the level that they're at? That's a better question to ask yourself, right? Because Rome wasn't built in a day. They're going to gradually pick up their writing skills, right? So you want to meet them always where they're at, and then see if you can bring them to a level above with your guidance, with your input.
How can you teach writing to false beginner students?
I would say start with the basics first before you get them starting writing. Make sure they know basics of English, such as the fact that you capitalize at the beginning of a sentence, or that you end a declarative sentence with a period, or end an interrogative sentence with a question mark. Make sure they know the basic parts of a complete sentence, like a subject and a predicate. And then once you've covered those parts, you can teach them the basic parts of speech, maybe not all of them. I think there are 8. You can teach them the 4 basic parts of speech, like nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. Make sure they can come up with vocabulary and categorize those words accordingly. And then before they get into actual writing, give them some exercises that will help them, like gap fill exercises, sentence completion exercises. And then when they have become comfortable with that, you can give them real writing exercises and see how they do from there.
My tip is the same as what I said for the first question, which is when you're working with beginner students, you want to give them as much as you can in terms of language input. So what should only be missing from the text, or what you should be focusing on as an output for their writing, is just the target language for that lesson, or for whatever they've developed an understanding of in that particular unit so far. That's it. So you can do one of 2 things. You can provide the vocabulary and then have them figure out the structure, or with beginners, I would suggest giving them the structure and then letting them fill in the vocabulary for it. So, and there are ways to do that. You can use substitution tables, you can use fill in the gap exercises, whatever already has the structure built in will be best for them.
I think it kind of depends on who your students are and exactly how they're a false beginner. But just in my personal experience, a lot of the false beginners they remember the speaking part, and they're not as strong in writing because they probably never were, even when they learned it in the first place. And so I think that activities that help visualize the change between spoken English into written English is very helpful. So I like to do lots of dictations at the beginning, because it helps the student go from the oral English to the written version of it. And early in their career, they produce a correct English. And there is a little thing, there's a paragraph of English in their handwriting that they know is correct. And I think it's very empowering. Plus you have the example. They can start modeling once they kind of know how to translate from the spoken English that they know to the written version of that.
And in addition to what Sarah mentioned, I also would like to suggest that you guys give them a structure. What I mean by that is, like, what should be at the beginning, what should be in the middle, what should be at the end part of their writing piece. You can also provide them with transition statements, like the transition statements or phrases and expressions that are in line with their level of knowledge would be really, really helpful. Let's go to the next question. What writing activities would you recommend for intermediate or advanced students?
Right. So I would do a little bit more comparison type writing for intermediate advanced students. So one of the things that is very common in ESL education is to have two students doing a spot the difference. So they have their own image of a picture, and you have to discuss the differences between each picture. So what you could do is you could actually give the intermediate student both the pictures and have that student write what the differences and similarities are between the two pictures. So that way you're starting to incorporate transition words for comparison and contrast. So that's one I would suggest for more advanced students. Another thing that I really like to do is scrambled sequences. So that's taking a story and having them figure out which part of the story is the beginning, the middle, and the end. And the great thing about scrambled sequences is you can use texts for different levels of learners and scramble the text. So this is actually good for any level. If you want to increase the complexity, just choose a more complex text for a higher level of learner.
I also do a pair work activity that's kind of like Spot the Difference, but it's like the text version of that. It's not the same in that it's like talking about like comparing between two different pictures, but I give two students in a group, in a pair, texts, and it's two versions of the same text, and they have different blanks to fill, and they cannot see each other's texts, and they read out to each other what's on their piece of paper without showing it, and then they have to fill it out accordingly. So I think that's a really good listening exercise, but it also helps them practice their writing. It's sort of like a gap fill exercise. Another thing I like to do is pre-teach my students linking language, and then using that linking language to create a creative story as a class. And I think that's been very helpful for my students, understanding the flow of language and just creating a story. I think that's been very helpful for them.
My opinion on this question, it comes from a place where I do not really teach academic English at a college level like a lot of the other people on the English blog do. And so as my students are intermediate and advanced, I like to give them more complex tasks that mimic how you would write, the kinds of things you would need to write in real life. But kind of, it's always in service to a larger purpose that's not producing writing. Because when was the last time I wrote an essay on something? I'm not an author. So, you know, so I like to do things where they have to write scripts or storyboards and then produce a video. Or they need to write a recipe and then present it to the class and do the types of things that you would do if you weren't just writing essays. But I think it's very different if you have to teach people academic English if they're trying to do a degree in English. They really, really need that kind of writing. But many people don't, that aren't in that world. And so I think it's important to try to mimic the types of writing that they'll actually see and that they're familiar with from their regular life in their mother tongue.
And I would also add, since these are intermediate and advanced learners, you can take them a little bit out of their comfort zone and give them writing prompts, for example, like a piece of news that they want to hear or something like that, something that would grab the world's attention, for example. So give them writing prompts that will spark their interest to other topics as well. That will be a good start for intermediate and advanced learners. Next question. How do you correct students' writing without hurting their feelings? So I think in another vlog episode, we talked about the sandwich principle. And I feel like this also applies in correcting your students' writing. You start with positive or encouragement and specify which part of his or her writing you appreciate more, and then sandwich that with your correction, what needs to be done, what needs to be improved further, and show them how to do it. And then you end again with a positive note, giving them giving them encouragement and appreciation, so that it will give them that boost to go to take their writing to the next level.
In error correction for writing, I like to be very, very direct and specific with the types of things that I'm going to be correcting. So before the student starts the writing, if I'm telling you we're doing past tenses, you're spelling, you need to have your EDs, you need to have the sequence of tenses, the correct grouping. That's what I want. Then that's what I look at, and that's what I mark. I don't mark other things. If they're missed some periods, I don't generally mark it unless I've got a really stickler student that really wants that kind of stuff. But otherwise, I think it's important. It's a very complex process, writing. It involves a lot of moving parts, and it's not fair to require your student to get every single part correct. And unlike spoken, it's just the mistake stays there on the page, staring at you the whole time. And you can't miss it, you can't move on. So yeah, be very, very direct and clear and grade that.
Yeah, typically I just focus on correcting the language focus at hand. So if, for example, we covered adverbs, adjectives, verbs in a lesson, and I have them do a writing activity where they have to write a blog post or something and showcase their knowledge. That's what I'm going to focus on when I am correcting. I mean, things like capitalization, punctuation. If they make a lot of errors in that area, then I think I'm going to focus on the language focus at hand instead, just so they don't get discouraged. But at the same time, I'm giving them feedback and helping them improve their writing skills as a result.
So one of the things I like to do when just to avoid singling people out is I like to look at patterns in my corrections. So what are the words or what are the structures that in general most students are struggling with? And then I will focus on those errors or focus on that vocabulary, and I will often reteach it. And I'll reteach it still by eliciting the correct structure or the correct vocabulary from the students. But then everybody gets to learn 2 or 3 things a second time, which always benefits, because learning is more of a spiral than a linear line. So it actually helps reinforce the learning by coming back to it and doing like a global or a class-wide correction. So I suggest that you do that as well. And just as Sarah and Christine have also mentioned, only correct the target language so that the student doesn't get overwhelmed. I also suggest using a green pen rather than a red pen, just because of the psychology and associations with the color red. I know it's just a small change, but it can make a big impact for somebody who's been seeing that red pen a lot in their past and have negative associations with it already.
All right, we're ready for the next question. So the next question is, what do you encourage students to do in their free time to improve their writing skills?
I would encourage students to do things that I did to improve my writing skills. I think even though I'm a native speaker, the things that I did to improve my skills would very much work for ESL learners. I would suggest that they read books and I know that's a very obvious thing, and many people would say that, but it really is a useful way for them to improve their writing skills. It exposes them to different styles of writing, different forms, but more importantly, it shows them correct English grammar, like, and how to learn vocabulary in context. And I think that's something that reading books allows students to do. In addition to reading books, I would suggest that students journal. And I think that makes them more comfortable with writing since they can do it in the comfort of their own home. And then, of course, if you, the teacher, give them feedback, which you should, it would be a great way for them to identify weaknesses in their writing and do that on a regular basis. And I would also say that journaling makes writing personal, and of course, the more personalized and the more involved students are in the learning process, the more they are going to learn. And so I think that helps with retention. So those are the two things I would recommend.
I would recommend that they challenge themselves with a word of the day, and then, but not stop there. So I want them to think about, so it should always come from a source of inspiration, like a word that they're interested and being able to express in in a different tongue. And then let's say the word is love. Okay, I deal with a lot of teenagers, so they like to talk about this. So they find the word for love, and then, but it's not enough to know the word for love in English. Now I want a sentence, right? So they need to know the part of speech of that word too. Are they using love as a verb or love as a noun? And then, you know, you can even build it into your classroom. You can do 15 minutes of word of the day, calling on random students, a word that they learned. And you can give guidance, like, okay, you know, I have something called a dead word list. It's a list of words that are way too easy and that don't elevate their language at all. And so they can't use any of those words as part of their word of the day. You know, or it's good for adjectives, adverbs, and nouns because it lends itself to that, right? So, and then why the sentence? Because they will only truly understand the word if they know how to put it in a sentence that conveys the meaning accurately. If they can't do that, then they don't know the meaning of the word. We can talk more about that when we have a vocabulary instruction episode, but that's something you can do. Okay.
Besides reading a lot, I also recommend getting a pen pal. Find somebody that you have to communicate in English with. You need a pen pal where you don't speak their other language. It's great for the COVID times as well. You can email them, you can Instagram them, you can Snapchat them, you can get on their Facebook. I think that's a really great way to really engage in writing because it's highly communicative. And who knows, you might get to use all of those lovely transition words and well-written material if you're writing love letters in another language. There's lots of things you can do with it. So get a pen pal and write to them.
The reason why I'm smiling at the word pen pal is because that reminds me of the old times. This belongs to my and PJ's generation. During the time of snail mails, when you need to have to send them by post. It's crazy, but it's fun, and it works for sure. All right, the next question is, what does the term graded language mean?
So graded language is when you talk about language being graded, you're talking about using vocabulary and using structures for the level of the student that you are teaching. So that means that you want to make sure that when you error correct, or when you when you try to elicit from the student, you're watching the structures that you use. So for example, for a complete beginner, you would use only present tense sentences, simple present sentences to communicate instructions, to give feedback, to give them instructions. Okay, and you would want to use simple words, not multisyllabic words, that kind of thing. Okay, same with the reading and the writing. If you say, oh, this material has a graded language, it's understood that it's been created specifically for that level of learner. So that's how you want to think of graded language. And as a teacher, as an ESL teacher, you should be grading your language depending on the level that you're teaching.
Right. So the next question is, how do we choose and use graded materials for each level of learning?
As PJ said, when you're speaking to students, let's say you're speaking to beginner level students, you don't speak to them at a natural native English pace. You speak to them more slowly with simpler vocabulary, and use words that don't have too many syllables. And the same thing applies to reading and writing. So let's say you're dealing with beginner level students. You want to give them materials like textbooks that are graded according to their level. And the same thing applies for all levels of students. If you happen to work independently or work at an institution that doesn't have those materials available to you, then you would have to create those materials on your own. And again, you would have to vary them according to the levels of your students. So if you're giving activities to your beginner level students, give them text that contains simplified language with basic vocabulary. Maybe include illustrations to help them better understand the text at hand. If you have intermediate level students, you could give them a little bit more difficult grammar and vocabulary, but stick with something that might be familiar to them, like a familiar topic, so that they can still engage with the material. And then with advanced students, I like to give my advanced students authentic material, like novels. And that being said, I would give them a lot of guidance and support and check for understanding along the way, ask them open-ended questions to make sure they understand the material.
I don't work with kids, so I like to give texts that are, as if possible, conceptually high, but require like a low level of language input. So an example would be nursery rhymes or fairy tale stories that have been written for emerging or young learners. So there's an engaging story, but the level is the level of the learner rather than the age of the learner. Another example would be Aesop's fables. So again, there's a limited input of text. Most of the stories are maybe 6-7 pages long only, so it doesn't feel overwhelming. But conceptually and critically, those ethical dilemmas and morals are still quite high, but the text is limited. So those are the things that I suggest to you. So for another writing task that you might want to give them that's conceptually high is maybe some pages from a graphic novel. So they have a lot of visual cues, and then maybe some of the dialogue is there, but some of the dialogue has been whited out for them to put their own writing in. So that's an example of a graded material that you can use that can be conceptually rich, but still has a limited amount of language that they need to comprehend to do the task.
I have two things I want to say about this topic. One is very practical, so I'll start with that one, which is if you are looking for easy graded articles, I like the website Newsela. It's pretty big. I think it's American. It gets real news collected from lots of different outlets, and then there's a team of people that rewrite them to different levels. It's organized on the US grading school system to tell you what kind of age group it is. But the nice thing about it is you can grade the language to any level within the public school education range. So you can get a really interesting article that adults or teens would want to read, and you can grade it down to the more basic without it being news for kids. That's really helpful. I love that site. It's free. They have some paid articles, but they have plenty of free stuff on there. And making an account is free as well. My other piece of statement, I guess, is so yes, I teach kids, and I also have taught adults at very low levels. And there are like some graded readers out there in the world, which can be nice, but I think you have to be careful when you're teaching adults with really low levels, because while some of the children's literature is appropriate and engaging, I do love Aesop's fables, fairy tales, some of it is just not engaging, and some of those graded readers for adults, in my opinion, can be a little patronizing. They can be, you know, just, I don't think they're that engaging. I'm just speaking from personal experience where I've had these graded readers for adults, and it's all like, what do I do? My husband's an alcoholic. They're just depressing because I guess they're geared towards recent immigrants and the problems that they might have, which is great, but it's horrible when that's the only thing available for you to read. And yeah, there's no other remedy to that really, other than to use news, or to create your own. So yeah, that's a passion project. So.
All right, thank you for your answer, guys. And for me, I'm a stickler for easy ways, simplicity, and efficiency as well. So Sarah already mentioned a website where you guys can find that. So why not just Google it, right? So type the level of your learner and then look for specific keywords and phrases you can use on Google. And I'm sure you'll be able to find resources related to your needs. And I'm sure you can also find some Facebook groups that provide those weighted materials you can use. And we're now down to the last question of the day. And the last question is, how do you teach writing to kids in a digital classroom?
So yeah, now the way we're teaching has kind of changed a little bit. And a lot of teachers are now working on these digital classrooms on digital platforms. And I would like to encourage everybody teaching writing online to bear in mind that there is a different type of skill involved in writing, and writing on a piece of paper with your hand, and producing writing digitally. And for children or older adults, or just people that haven't had access and don't have the actual skill of typing or using a computer, it can be extremely, extremely frustrating to produce writing in a digital classroom. And it's not because their writing is bad or they don't know the grammar or they're not engaged. It's just the lack of the skill to get it in this media. So work with your students if it means that you're accepting handwritten things that have been scanned to you. If it means encouraging them to do voice to text and then editing that text on the computer. And don't make your assignments and your graded work dependent on having these technical skills. If you do have the authority and you're in a program for children or whoever, it could be very useful to actually do a digital literacy component. You can even do it in English and teach these kids to type in English. It's a skill that'll serve them forever. But yeah, don't forget that there's a huge skill set that you probably take for granted as an adult and a person teaching on the internet. If you didn't know, you've had to learn a whole bunch. So remember that your students are doing that too, and it's a different process. So be kind.
I haven't taught kids much. I've mostly taught adult learners, but I have noticed a difference between teaching writing in a physical classroom versus teaching writing in a digital classroom. And one thing that I like about teaching in a digital classroom is that you can provide feedback and corrections in real time while the student is writing. So that's an advantage that I really enjoy. Whereas if you're teaching in a physical class and they're doing physical writing, you can't offer any corrections unless you interrupt them and ask them if you could take a look at their writing, and then you give them some feedback. But in a digital setting, you can do it in real time, especially if you're having them write on a Google document and you share it with them, and you can provide them feedback from there. And that's been very useful for me.
For me, you can also combine other media. For example, you can incorporate music, short video clips to prompt them, or photos as well. It presents a blessing and also a challenge at the same time, because you have to consider that a topic we already discussed before, which is the multiple intelligences. Some people are just naturally gifted in writing and some are not, right? So that's why I like how Sarah started with her tips. And that is all for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you got something new from our discussion. Would like for you to leave your answer to the question in the comment. What have you learned in tonight's lesson, and how will you apply it in your lessons?
Don't forget that we provide customized lesson plan making services. We also do curriculum development. We do life and career coaching sessions, and we produce weekly vlog and blog content related to ESL education. Please do send us a message at www.theenglishblog.com, and be sure to subscribe to our website for exciting offers and updates for our vlogs to come.
Don't forget to smash that like across social media. You can find us on Facebook at The English Blog for Teachers. You can find us on Instagram and also on LinkedIn. And across all those sites, we've got lots of links to our articles and blogs. So hope to see you there.
And until next time, guys, stay healthy, happy, and keep learning. Bye, everyone.